everyone, it's Sadie. Welcome back to the Hear Me Out podcast. Today is a notes app episode, which means there are a lot of bullet points to cover. My mind was a bit scatterbrained on today's topic of embarrassment. The notes app title is literally on embarrassment. And part of the reason why I had a lot of thoughts was because actually today I wanted to bring in some source material, and with that I was kind of taking notes along the way, or at least wanting to write something down for later so then right now in the studio I could remember to bring it up. But I went through some Substacks, I went through some JSTOR aka peer reviewed articles. What else did I go through? I went through a TikTok or two, and then just kind of compared it to my own experiences, my own thoughts on maybe what I had going into it. There was other non-peer reviewed, but other articles as well in the mix. A little bit of everything. I'm not necessarily feeling an expert on embarrassment, but I just wanted one or two things to point to. So I spent some of my day doing that in terms of over my coffee and between classes and whatnot. But I've been thinking about embarrassment for a little bit now, because the question, is everything embarrassing, has been ringing in my head, I swear, for 2 months. And I was thinking, you know what, that would be a good podcast title, but in terms of an answer or what I actually have to say about that, I don't know. So I was just kind of thinking about it, and then in class 2 days ago now, I had to present something in front of a lecture hall of about 250 people, give or take. And this guy I'm friendly with sits next to me in class, very kind. I was talking with him as we do, and, oh, how's your day? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And he knew I had to present. And I said, well, I would like to say that I'm not someone who gets embarrassed easily, but I think that I know that would be a lie. That being said, I don't necessarily let embarrassment get in the way, because embarrassment, as we'll get into a little bit today, is definitely tied to fear. And I wouldn't say that I let fear and embarrassment get in the way of doing things. That doesn't mean I don't feel them, but it's just kind of like, do it scared, do it embarrassed, or at least anticipating embarrassment. And I've definitely mentioned that before, because what kind of life are you going to live, if you just kind of stay in your comfort bubble? But I said that to him, and he was like, yeah, like that's a good way to go about things. It's going to be great, whatever. And I went up, and there's kind of the pang in your chest, the rosy cheeks. I'm not someone who necessarily feels nerves. My hands don't necessarily begin to sweat always. I'm comfortable enough in front of a crowd, but it was kind of, I was presenting this artifact. The teacher had been calling it a media artifact, which is essentially a video we had created to the class and amongst a group. And I was in this video, and the whole point of it was I was looking very disheveled and all this stuff. Anyway, so I felt a bit embarrassed. Granted, I mean, I could have not showed up to class that day. I could have just emailed the professor, and normally they're pretty forgiving in terms of, oh, that's fine, where you just cite anxiety and it's whatever. But I also wanted to support the other people who, in solidarity, I was having to present with. Anyway, not without rambling on too much, because the important thing here is really that conversation, that comment where I was talking about feeling embarrassed but doing it anyway, or at least anticipating embarrassment. So with that key word, it got me thinking about it again. And so then I just decided, you know what? Let's talk about it. And if I don't know what I want to say, then maybe that's just a reflection of not being well read. Or I read a quote recently, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially, when your mind is working too much, when it's racing and you have too many thoughts, that's a sign to read. Take a breath and read. versus if your mind you don't feel is working enough and you have a lack of thoughts and you need it to race a little more and you need to wait, sorry. I totally just mixed it up. If your mind is racing, you write. That's when you stop and when you write. You have enough thoughts and you can synthesize or however you want to go about it, just put it on paper and slow your brain down that way. What I meant to say then is if you have a lack of thoughts, you read. And so reading is a thought stirrer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So I've been kind of taking to that quote. And again, it was more eloquently put, something on Pinterest as I normally discuss, but I've been taking to that idea and I again went to Substack and that's been kind of my go-to. I know it's not necessarily a scholarly source, but it's just interesting what people put on there when they don't have the pressure of needing to be peer reviewed. It's kind of it's sometimes people's diary entries. I don't know, it feels very personal, enough spur of the moment, not necessarily everyone, my understanding, not necessarily a lot of people are doing their best work on Substack. They're not doing crazy edits and whatever. And sometimes people bring in research, but a lot of the times, at least what I engage with, is kind of boiled down to the one person and their thoughts. And so that kind of gets things going. Whether or not it's supported by research doesn't matter, but it gets my brain working. And whether or not I agree, I try to think critically from the get-go about it. And then I did the JSTOR articles of, okay, is there research to back up any of these points? What does the literature say as I hate that term, the literature. It just seems so highbrow. But alas, I'm doing a lot of research projects as of recent, and that's just a buzzword, and now I don't even know what I had said before using that. Anyway, and then I had gone to just regular articles because, again, it was kind of in a day's work, less than a day's work. So when you have highbrow terminology and peer-reviewed articles and they're doing all these crazy bibliographies and stuff, it's not necessarily the most accessible. And so I was doing blah, 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 whatever. Okay, so I think you get the gist. And I figured what I would start off with as an incredibly exposure therapy-esque situation. I'm going to list off some times that I have been embarrassed recently. Well, not recently, but the first few that came to mind. And I am going to kind of break down, or I'm going to kind of preface. No, never mind. I was going to say that I was going to preface, but then my thing isn't going to apply to the following four things. Why it would be embarrassing? Well, I think you'll take to that. And one of them in particular is a gross thing. So I was thinking, I don't like that. I don't want to say that on the internet, whatever. But then for that very reason, I have to say, okay, so what if it's gross? So what if it is so embarrassing? That's the whole point. Embarrassment is almost a choice. It's a social construct, but I feel that it is more a choice than not. It is not totally a choice, but it is more a choice than not, if that makes sense. Because there is something to be said, again, for the physical reaction and such, why we feel embarrassed. There is something to be said for that, but this embarrassment is something you can talk yourself down from. That's my argument as of right now. So anyway, for these exact reasons of I don't necessarily want to say it on the internet, it is probably oversharing. Well, for the sake of this argument and for my call to action later, I gotta do it myself. And this is a great platform to do so. So anyway, the podcast, number one, as proud as I am of it, I do get embarrassed by it. I have a hard time sometimes wanting to ask people to be on. It's just kind of like, well, why would you come on a podcast if oftentimes it would be someone somewhat removed from me or the people I think about reaching out to, and networking, blah, 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 sure, rejection, all that stuff. But something in me is very much just, I respect people's time too much. I understand time is a luxury. Why the heck would they want to spend it with me on here? Whatever. So that's a thing, but then also to kind of stand behind what you do when it is not necessarily like not everyone's having a podcast. If everyone was doing a podcast, it would be normal or cool. But obviously, I've also talked a lot about you got to stick your neck out there and you got to be cringe before it becomes cool. So I'm not going to belabor that point. But so the second one, I have not told really few people in the world know this, but I will say when someone asks me about an embarrassing time, this is where my mind goes to first. And it happened when I was in third grade. So I think that really speaks to how much embarrassment I felt, where even when the edges of the memory are fuzzy, I remember the feeling, the idea that you will never forget how you feel even when you remember the details. So when I was in third grade, I danced as a bedazzled turkey with two other bedazzled turkey students in front of my whole elementary school. And it was in an assembly, and I won't tell you how we got there. It doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, I was in a full body. Oh, my mom is calling me. I'll put her on speaker. Hi,
Hello.
Mom. I'm recording on the podcast.
Oh, hi. Two more sleeps.
Two more sleeps. Okay, can I call you after?
No, I'm just going to bed. It's 10:10.
Oh,
But
okay, yeah.
if you would like to call me, of course, but you don't need to call me. Is my point. I will certainly wake up and speak to you in my boudoir. Can you tell I'm watching Bridgerton?
Yes. Okay. No,
All
I'm
right,
not
love
gonna
you.
love you. I'll call you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye. That's my mom for you, everybody. As I was saying, it doesn't matter how I got there. At the end of the day, I was in a full body turkey suit, as in it was over the head. You can only see my mouth and my eyes. Bedazzled, let me tell you. It was quite something. I wonder if the two students, I could actually text one of them. I'm still in touch with one of them. I wonder if they still recall that time, or if maybe to them it was two guys, so maybe they were feeling less inclined. That okay? That's rude and kind of sexist, probably to assume. So taking that back, but I wonder if they feel that pang in their chest when they think of third grade, or if they've totally forgotten about this. But that is a thing. Okay, then just kind of a general comment is when you wave and someone and the person you wave to sees you and ignores you, or maybe they didn't see you at all, and so they naturally didn't know to wave back. But then making it more specific, actually, the other day, I waved to someone, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I waved to someone who I used to talk to and talk to as in, I guess, like romantically. That's like a weird way to put it. But anyway, for lack of a better term, we had a thing. And I saw him the other day, and it was the weird 3 seconds of eye contact before anyone does something. And then I just waved and went to go on about my day, but then he just ignored me. And then naturally, your body just kind of responds, and your cheeks go red, and it's just kind of awful for 5 seconds, and then it's over. And then there's nothing to really be embarrassed about because at the end of the day, you were the one who put your neck out there and was being kind. God forbid someone is civil after you are not romantically interested anymore. But okay, the final one these three, not a big deal, whatever. This one is quite embarrassing. And I am saying this out loud, not because I believe it, but because I'm manifesting it. I am not embarrassed about this. I won't allow myself to be embarrassed about this because, embarrassing stories make some of the best ones. I'm not going to go into too much detail either. I think this is enough of exposure therapy at the tip of the iceberg, little details part of the story. But in more recent memory, when I was in Paris, I was in this jazz club with friends, and Not all of them I was super close with, but so we were in this jazz club, and once we decided to leave, we were in this alleyway to get from point A to point B, and it's a whole group of people. And as we're in this alleyway, and one thing leads to another. I'm wearing these heeled Steve Madden boots. One thing leads to another. I slip in what was, I can confidently say, was piss. I fully slipped in piss in an alleyway in Paris, and my elbows, like, it was awful. And I was wearing a skirt, ass out, my elbows scraped up. And I couldn't believe it, to the point where I just, wow. I'm, again, really just back there. I can feel it practically. I just sat there for probably the longest 5-10 seconds of my life. Full 10 Mississippi, sitting in this piss, because I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to do with myself. And at that point, you just gotta get up and you just gotta go. And so I tried to own it. That is what all anyone can ever do at their best, is own it. So I get up, I fix my skirt, and obviously everyone around me saw. And I will say, I wasn't the only person. So that was kind of funny to then be able to go off the other person who slips vibe, and then we're just kind of going back and forth, and oh haha, that is so unbelievable and crazy, but chin high, we're good, we keep going. But especially I find when you're with boys, like, your girls, they're gonna be like, oh my goodness, are you okay? Yes, that was funny. They'll probably give you crap for it, but guys, to another level, in my experience, will hold you to that. They will never forget it. That came up multiple times in the next hour. It came up the following day, when I thought only a select group of people had seen it. And then we were trying to get out of the Louvre, and we were struggling to get out of the Louvre, and I guess someone was starved for conversation and threw that out there as a topic, as we're trying to, and I can't multitask, and so then I naturally just stop, and I'm trying to defend myself before resuming my search to leave. And that felt more relevant to the story before saying it. I forget what the exact connection was, but I do remember being in the Louvre when this conversation came up again, and I vaguely remember just being like, oh my gosh, I didn't really think more than X amount of people saw it, but you know what? That happened. And it's the most embarrassed I felt in a really long time, and it is what it is, and I have nothing else to say. That is just bad. And again, you guys saw my ass out. So that was a thing. And plus I had the battle scars. I thought that my one elbow was gonna scar. The bruise and cuts were there for so long on both of my elbows and like my wrist area. I genuinely have chills. So in saying this, owning up to this very embarrassing moment, I before also saying this, when I was going back and forth and I was like, is this too far? Is this oversharing? I was reminded of an Emma Chamberlain podcast episode, Anything Goes, and she was telling this entire story, this long story, about how she convinced herself she had gone to the bathroom number 2 in someone she was seeing's bed, and how she essentially kind of like snuck into their house again and was figuring it out. This really kind of gross, intimate, definitely oversharing story. And I was like, you know what? If she can do that on the internet and be fine, let me be brave about, again, not many people can say they slipped and pissed outside a jazz club in Paris. So I can laugh on it more now and I don't feel shame. But at the time I was just kind of like, this is not classy, if anything. I don't know what it is. Probably big E embarrassing, but I can tell you what it's not. And and it's not classy. But we live, and when a lot of other memories from Paris fade, I know that one will not, because that was a negative emotion. But all of this being said, when I was going through one Substack article in particular, shout out to Kate Berg, credit where it's due, she had said true embarrassment requires vulnerability. The kind of idea that it keeps you up at night. You can't necessarily move on from it quickly all of the time. My waving example, you can move on from that in 5 seconds, and then maybe it will revisit you when you're trying to go to bed, and the second your head hits the pillow, it's like, oh my god, I can't believe he ignored me. That was so embarrassing. But she called kind of interactions, or when you're venturing to do something that is tiny, of that kind of hand waving nature, an act of earnestness, which I thought was a really interesting way to put it. And I was connecting also her point. She said, in not wanting to be embarrassed, we become apathetic. So we have a lack of interest and concern. And the second that she said, well, because embarrassment is bad and it's a social construct and it's all these negative emotions, whatever, we're inclined to then just not engage in things that we anticipate will make us feel embarrassed. And in doing that, we filter so much joy and the potential for joy out of our lives. And I connected this to what I called the nonchalance epidemic. There is such a thing, essentially. There's a phenomenon of nonchalance and the idea of wanting to be mysterious, and how, you know, guys want what they don't fully know about, or what they don't have, and blah blah blah. This is all connecting to, well, no, like, don't put yourself out there. Be nonchalant. Make people question. That's how you get people to draw in. But what if we, just kind of wore our heart on our sleeve, and then the right people will be drawn into that. They won't be drawn into ideas and fantasies surrounding you, but rather the joy that you actually are forthcoming with. What is actually right in front of their face, Why can no one just take that at face value? I'm inclined to say that the right people will. And my algorithm knew that I was kind of looking into this, and it responded exactly to that with a video of this. It was a table of friends, a bunch of girlfriends, and at the end of it, it was one of the girl's boyfriends, and this select girl was dancing, flailing her arms, just being very silly, and total ball of joy, it seemed. And the camera pans to the boyfriend, and he is just googly eyed. Made my heart happy, truly. And the caption was something along the lines of, don't dull your light for anyone, because the right person will see the value and the rarity in that, and they will love you for it. And I got caught up in the comments. Basically, people were providing anecdotes of, one that I'm recalling right now is a couple. One person in the couple was introducing their significant other to their family, and they were playing this game, and the girl in the couple it was her family, she had laughed, and she has a really loud laugh, allegedly, and the mom made her feel stupid for it, or kind of apologized on her behalf, or something of the sort. And then the boyfriend was like, no, isn't it great? Isn't that the best sound you've ever heard? So that kind of idea. But I just think it's such a shame. And it's such a shame that nonchalance is the default, rather than putting yourself out there. If you're trying to proceed with caution, well, why are we defaulting to this mysteriousness? And I'll get there in one more moment, but my last point that was connecting to the Kate Bird Substack. Well, actually, I'm going to quote this thing. I don't think life has to constantly be a game of strategy. There is no prize at the end of all this for whoever cared the least. You have nothing to lose by showing your hand and everything to gain from being sincere. So then to that, besides the fact that at face value is amazing, it made me think of tasteful oversharing. So let's not trauma dump for the sake of trauma dumping, but who cares if I share, I'm just gonna again call it my Paris piss story. Who who cares if people know a lot about me? Why would I want to be mysterious when I can instead tell this again with not a lot of details, and maybe you're left wondering about some things about it, but just know I was embarrassed and I ended up in that puddle in an alley. Why not tell you about that? That is an opportunity to connect with people, maybe to, humble myself in front of you, and then maybe I'm more approachable to other people, or then I give the subconscious green light to other people. Well, maybe they can trust me, or they would want to confide in me, or we can swap funny, embarrassing stories, sort of thing. So I think tasteful oversharing is my my term that I'm going to kind of coin here, where sometimes it might be a fine line, but I mean, nothing else with that. Nothing else with that. Again, trauma dumping is one thing, and I feel like that's a little more black and white. You don't need to be telling people in the first 5 minutes that you went through XYZ hardship. But, I mean, if you're putting yourself out there so much to the point where it's like, yeah, my skirt flew up in this alleyway and it was awful, I'm inclined to say that's funny and would say a lot about me and whoever's in a similar instance. But then also with the hand waving thing, I would rather wave to someone. Like, I think I would be kicking myself more if I had not waved at that guy I mentioned earlier. If I had not waved and possibly just kind of extended that olive branch in a way, just kind of like, hey, we're cool, because we didn't end on bad terms, mind you, and a lot of time has passed since we've talked, but I see him in passing a lot. And if I didn't wave, I would feel like an asshole. And just why not? Why would I not acknowledge someone that I do know? And I think they're a fine person as well. So, and you kind of think of maybe you shared a class with someone. I'll give a different example. Maybe you shared a class with someone and you maybe think that they wouldn't remember you. So you see them a term later and you're walking by, and even though you sat next to each other for 10 weeks straight and exchanged pleasantries and maybe even worked on a group project or something, 10 weeks later, class is gone, whatever, but you see them, why wouldn't you wave to them, If it's out of fear of them forgetting you, who cares? Then they'll just think a stranger is waving at them and they'll smile back, or maybe they'll ignore you, and it's fine, because then you know that you were acknowledging that person, and maybe that did mean something to them, that you remembered them, and you can say that as much. So always be the person to wave. Who cares if they don't remember you? Who cares if they don't see you? Just why wouldn't you wave? Put that on a t-shirt. Why wouldn't you wave? Okay, so I think a lot, I would be, what's the word? Remiss. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the iconic Austin Butler Subway Takes video. So if you're not familiar, Subway Takes is an account. They have an Instagram, they have a TikTok, whatever. It's one of my favorite accounts. It's awesome. And they essentially use a Metro card as a microphone, and they go around and they're on the subway and they go, what's your take? And they ask strangers for hot takes, essentially. But sometimes, whether it's for promotion or whatnot, they'll have celebrities on. They've been doing that more recently, which I'm less inclined to like those videos, but Austin Butler was on. And his take, and I'm going to quote it, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, there's an ellipses in the middle of it, but at one point he said all these things. Quote, embarrassment is an underexplored emotion. Go out there and make a fool of yourself. Everything you want is on the other side of that. And think, say, do whatever you want about Austin Butler. He doesn't have to be your favorite celebrity. You don't necessarily have to like him, but I think in a nutshell, that is a great point. He didn't say it in his Elvis accent either, that he apparently needed a voice coach to unlearn after playing his Elvis part. But embarrassment is an underexplored emotion. I so agree. He had an anecdote about how he was at a party and he was wanting to go on the dance floor, and someone had turned to him and said that and encouraged him to go dance. Go make a fool of yourself, they said. And this really builds on the Substack article I mentioned of how everything we want is on the other side of embarrassment. And take this then as a sign if you're wanting to do a project, if you're wanting to. Someone actually came up to me the other day and said, "Hey, I want to talk about your podcast if you have a minute." And I was like, I would love to. I gave her my number. She was very sweet, and she had said, "I have been talking to my friend about wanting to start a podcast." And I just said, "Well, why don't you?" And she was listing off these reasons. And I just said, "Okay, here's my number. I will send you my name so you can put it in your contacts. And I'll send you a podcast episode, whatever, flip through the channel, whatever. If you have any questions, this is my credentials, essentially. Maybe I can answer some questions, but if anything, I would just encourage you to go for it. Just start it. Don't let any of these excuses get in the way, one of them being embarrassment. Just put yourself out there, and it's so much easier said than done. But I think, honestly, regret is one of the greatest motivators, if not the greatest motivator in my life, or should I say the anticipation of regret. And I think if you shift your thinking to throw regret into the mix, and how do you think about things differently then? Is it really going to matter in 10 years? Like look back. What didn't you do? I guarantee that I'm going to ask myself in 10, 20, 30 years what I didn't do versus reminiscing on what I did. And I really hope it's a short list, and I hope it's a short conversation in my head, because I don't want to essentially steal joy from myself before I have even felt it, because I was too embarrassed of changing I think this is then a good point. I know this may seem a little choppy, but in one of the JSTOR articles, they had said there were kind of two models for explaining why we feel embarrassed, and neither of them, nothing is absolute, and there's almost a third one that they threw out there, but I wrote the two down. The first one is we feel embarrassed when the social image we want to project the social image we want to project, when we feel that is being undermined and people are forming negative impressions of us. That is model one. So then, to my point, now that we have this to mull over, if there's any kind of social image that I want to project and protect, and then let's say writing a manuscript, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and a goal I'm thinking of wanting to be more serious about. But writing and sharing writing, I find, is inherently vulnerable and scary, and with all of that connected to embarrassment. Well, if I decide I want to be serious about that and I never pursue it because of all those anticipated negative emotions, I'll call them, even though I think it's healthy, like a certain amount of embarrassment and fear and all that, it's healthy, but negative in the sense of you don't seek them out. If I look back and I'm just kind of like, well, what social image did I protect by not pursuing that? Was that a valid social image? Do I even want to be known as, you know what I'm getting at? This goes back to the nonchalance thing. Well, if I was nonchalant, I wouldn't be sharing my writing. I wouldn't be sharing my vulnerabilities manifested in some way in some fictional form. So model 2, moving on, is when social interactions are disrupted without clear social expectations to govern behavior. The example this scholarly article used was happy birthday, and how a lot of people feel embarrassed when, let's say you're out at a restaurant, let's make it a public setting. When you're out at a restaurant and your family is very loudly singing happy birthday. And it's not because you don't appreciate it, but because there's not a clear set of social expectations of where to go from there. You're not necessarily embarrassed because you're scared you're making a bad impression, an impression that maybe contradicts or threatens the one that you want to be putting forth. It's just more about you're not sure how to proceed. Well, you just kind of awkwardly sit there and nod your head, and you don't necessarily want to sing happy birthday to yourself. So then you feel embarrassed from that. And I feel like that applies to a lot of situations as well. That was very interesting. And then so I was still kind of thinking, okay, well, those are reasons for why we're embarrassed. I guess. Or maybe it's one level of reason, but really what is at the root of this? Why do we feel embarrassed? Is there almost a history? And I also read someone say how you get embarrassed as a response to your brain doesn't necessarily know how to interpret social danger from physical danger. And so I wanted to look into the validity of that point. And that kind of led me to this other article that they talked about. Think back to the time of nomads before there was necessarily even a language recorded that we know of, and the history of tribes and a tribe mentality, and how you all have your roles in the tribe, and being embarrassed. Let's say you failed to fulfill your one responsibility that could result in being ostracized. You're embarrassed by failing and then possibly being ostracized. And then once you're kind of ostracized from that group, that could lead to very much life or death situations. All of a sudden, you don't have that group for protection, for kind of supplying you with food if that was someone else's role, whatever. So the idea of embarrassment and your brain, the same part of your brain that feels embarrassment is the same part of your brain that deals with anxiety and fear. Like it's triggered by that same part of your brain. And so you have to go out of your way to reprogram that, because there's a reason for it. But then now that you maybe understand this reason of, oh my gosh, sometimes my brain, let's say I'm going to go back to that example. I was presenting in front of that 250 person lecture in this video, and I look horrible and the audio was weird, whatever. And I feel people staring at me, and the video is a parody, so they're laughing, but my anxiety is thinking maybe they're laughing at me versus at the character of me, whatever. My brain can't parse through that and say, no, that might be a social hit, but it's not a physical hit. And so that's internalized. So with that, you have to reprogram your brain when either something embarrassing happens to you. Let's say you spill a drink at a party and you're cleaning it up, and instead of incessantly apologizing, one sorry will do, maybe two, but you just kind of don't need to rush and get skittish to go to the paper towels, but you walk on over to the paper towels and it's all fine and fun, and you clean it up and you move on, and your chin is high and you tell yourself it's not a big deal and you're not in physical threat, and you try to forget about it and you come up with some kind of mantra. So then when you go to sleep that night after the party, you're not thinking about, oh my gosh, I spilled this drink on the floor. I spilled this drink on my pants. How embarrassing was that? And now you're losing sleep over it. So maybe something happens, or even better, and what I think I'm going to try to do, so maybe join me in this endeavor, is seek out embarrassment to, minor levels. Again, you don't have to do anything insane, but maybe if my hand waving example of a person in class, maybe that spoke to you. Or maybe you've been in a situation, that exact situation, and then you didn't wave. Challenge yourself to wave next time. Challenge yourself to write the manuscript and share it. Things like that. So that's also a little easier to combat feelings of embarrassment when you're seeking out because you're anticipating it versus being put on the spot and you just kind of want to die inside and it's fight or flight almost. There's that. The last thing I'll say about one of the JSTOR articles, I didn't get to read through all of it. It was quite interesting, the premise of it, if nothing else, because I only skimmed the abstract and then part of the conclusion, but the idea was, or the experiment essentially was, these researchers went to, I think it was like 189 middle schoolers. Maybe it was even more than that, because I think it was, they polled adults and they compared, or it was elementary school actually, and it was 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 9-year-olds, and they were talking about the correlation of pride and embarrassment, but then also the students' respective understandings of those respective emotions. And part of that was that part of the conclusion, it was an audience is important for pride and embarrassment, but particularly embarrassment. And so again, just going on with the idea, or really reiterating that embarrassment is a social construct. And I think in embarrassing yourself, you open up the door for other people to be okay with the idea that they might embarrass themselves and that they're in a safe environment. I think of when I go to record, whether I'll walk around with a camera or something, and a lot of times I'll go places knowing I will want to record, but I don't bring my camera because that is so much less subtle than just bringing my phone and pulling my phone out of my pocket, and everyone has one of those, so who knows what people around me are thinking I'm taking this video for, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, versus if I have an actual camera, which is better quality and I like dealing with, and I have more storage on that than I do on my phone, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, people instantly think I'm doing something quote unquote more important, more legit. I have a goal for something greater than just sharing this with my friends. And again, it kind of takes guts to say, no, you're right, I'm here and I'm not a professional at this, but I just want to try my hand at recording and editing videos and see where that takes me. I'm not saying I'm anything more than amateur, but sometimes people assume that you think you are more than amateur, and sometimes not everyone, and maybe not even most people, but select amount of people that are jumping to those conclusions, and they're kind of wanting to make fun. Oh, you think you're so special, you think you're so good. The reality is those kind of people do exist, and it's really hard to tune them out. Even if you have 5 other people saying, oh, you're recording this video, to continue with this example, you recording this video, you getting the time, investing in the equipment, all of that stuff, that's really cool. 5 people could say that, but then if one person very loudly says, no, I think that's weird, why are you doing that? Ha ha ha. That rings true, unfortunately, and that kind of shadows the other people. And it takes an active effort to focus on those 5 instead of that one. It's like selective hearing at its finest. And at the end of the day with all of this, I'm almost thinking that being embarrassed or allowing yourself to be embarrassed, as much as it is a self-concerned endeavor and it's for your own life and essentially maximizing your joy and what you get out of it, as much as it is for that, it also can be that much for other people, because what I was then gonna say, and I realized I interrupted my thought with the camera thing, is, well, what I think about who I am most comfortable around with a camera, who I know won't judge me. And a lot of the times, the places I go where I do end up bringing my camera versus my phone, it's because I know I am in a safe space with people I have seen embarrass themselves. And they also, there's a component of, well, wanting to be on camera as well. Sometimes if I feel weird, or as I'm intruding on other people's space or pressing their comfortability in, if I'm vlogging or something, I'll say, and I'm around them, do they want to be in or not, whatever. But I do think it says a lot about relationships, though, who goes out of their way to make you feel comfortable, even when your knee-jerk reaction is, well, it's kind of embarrassing because I don't necessarily see other people doing it. And yeah, my favorite people are all people I am comfortable taking a camera out around, sort of thing. This morning even was a good example. I've been filming coffee diaries, and a lot of the times my roommates, our schedules in the morning at least, they don't necessarily overlap. So this morning I was making my coffee, and the camera was on, and one of my roommates, Charlotte, she walked in, and she was just like, "Oh my gosh, like, are you vlogging? Didn't miss a beat." And at first I kind of tensed up because I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, the camera's rolling, and this is kind of, it feels as if it was an intimate moment when it's just kind of you and the camera and your morning routine, and you're after the gym and you're just kind of rattling off whatever, and then like someone walks in on that and you stop your thought. Feels weirdly like an intimate moment, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, do I want to share? You're inclined to just kind of reach and turn off the camera. But and so I shared that with her. I was actually talking to the camera about embarrassment, and a lot of times that looks like me turning off the camera, but hey, like, want to say hey. And she joked, "No, it's not embarrassing. If anything, me walking around the house with my backpack on still after I've been here for 2 minutes, that's embarrassing, and I look like a little turtle," or something she was kind of insinuating. And immediately it was kind of like, okay, that's a safe space, and here on out, she is someone that I won't feel weird around, whatever. So it's, as much as we can do this for ourselves and we can refuse to be embarrassed and reprogram our own brains, it makes it that much easier and really just awesome when someone else kind of gives you that permission. It's not needed to not feel embarrassed. I want to emphasize that, but it is a nice feeling. And I'm not going to lie. Because again, with the highbrow terminology of the literature, well, when you point to the literature says it is human to want to be accepted and to be socially adept, I suppose is the word, and to kind of have this permission, it's, you're not a bad person, and any of the sort of those kinds of things, it's not bad to admit on some kind of psychological human being level at the core of us is we want to be accepted and just be in those safe spaces. So there's that. I could probably give 80 trillion different examples of times I've been embarrassed. I'm going to leave it at that one particularly awful example. You can, if you know me, you can hold that to me for the rest of my life, I suppose. But if you take nothing from this, if you do hold that to me for the rest of your life, then maybe the entire message just went right over your head. I do have to say, just kind of pointing out what the irony of that would be, because the best kind of people are those who give you permission to be your weird, embarrassing self. And it's really fine if you slip and piss in Paris. You know that in a few days, a few weeks, whatever, you're just going to be laughing about it, and they're never going to make you feel shame, because shame is another thing that is not the same as embarrassment, and we shouldn't throw those words around as if they're synonymous. Shame is a whole different thing, and it is proven to be one of the most painful human emotions. And I think that's a really interesting, despite it being a fine line between embarrassment and shame. But we can possibly get into that a different day. But that has also come up a good amount recently in a memoir I'm reading, for example. There was exploration of shame. But feel free, if you're feeling ever bold, to comment a time that you were embarrassed. Otherwise, I don't really have much else to say. Try not to be embarrassed. Challenge yourself to embarrass yourself. But so that those two things, I guess, they directly contradict. But it's like, in order to try not to feel embarrassed, you have to embarrass yourself. Isn't that an interesting dichotomy? I don't know. To be embarrassed or not to be embarrassed? That is the question. Is everything embarrassing? Inherently, yes. That is probably the short and simple answer. I think most, if not everything, is embarrassing. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Hold your head high and wave at people. Do the damn thing. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much. Can't even begin to say. As always, follow at HBU Hear Me Out on Instagram if you don't already. And a new thing I'm going to start to add is actually follow the podcast. Add it to your episodes on Spotify or subscribe. I guess if you're watching this on YouTube, follow the podcast, subscribe, follow the Instagram, do all the things. But also, if you don't feel like it, that's chill too. Have an amazing day, and I will see you next Sunday. Thanks so much.